It happens sometimes. Get the fuck over it.
100% of the schlups that are loading the game for the first time on launch day, it just feels really shit.
If those streamers that had all this early access weren't a bunch of yes men pussies, probably the game would have got fucking fixed, wouldn't it?
You know, we've talked about it a few times that the market's going to correct itself. And, you know, we've seen that in some of these layoffs. And I think we might start seeing that in tournament organizers as well. I know it's come up on previous shows talking about how tournament organizers are struggling to make money. If you look,
TOs and the average fan, that's part of the problem, is that there's this systematic misperception in the case of a lot of esports fans that these TOs like ESL are just DreamHack and whatever are just rolling in it, and they are not. It is making money. I can speak very informedly about Dota 2 and somewhat informedly about other esports titles. Richard, I'm sure, can as well. Now, it is very hard to make money running these events, and at least Valve's blanket removal of outright monetization of broadcast rights as a revenue channel is really, to me, it's long run detrimental, and I hope that it eventually gets changed with other titles.
Yeah, people make the joke that so Bulldog only gets invited to Dota events so that he doesn't sit at home and stream them, because you lose 20,000 viewers over to a Bulldog stream.
I mean, look, I'm a fan of Heinrich. I think he does a great job at the events that he goes to. But the fact is that incentive is there. Yeah. That when you look at guys like Bulldog and Grant, and this is no disrespect to either of them because I think they do a good job, but that incentive is there that you know, as a TO, you do have to think about inviting them, because otherwise you're splitting viewers. And that to me, it just puts everybody in a bad situation. I just don't.
Yeah, and I'm sure
like not have that problem there.
Because when you're selling to sponsors, and this is another thing for formats as well, there's been a lot of discussion about weird tournament formats recently that basically extend the tournament. And the reality there is the cost to extend a day, once you have everybody there and you're not necessarily in a venue, is pretty small compared to the additional revenue you can promise sponsors by giving them an additional 12 hours of broadcast time.
And it's not just about the additional 12 hours of broadcast. And this is where I'm sure Richard has a lot of expertise, that right now, if you deal with the modal person looking to invest in esports, okay, they have no idea what title they want to go into beyond maybe I happen to be a fan or I happen to have played this. And they don't, esports, even by some people within the industry, is still discussed as this sort of homogeneous landscape, which is really, really bad. One of the best things that you can do as a TO like ESL is you can offer a portfolio of events to an investor, so that, look, if Dota 2 ends up being the right environment for your product, great. But you may not have the research to know if Dota 2 or Counter-Strike or League or whatever. We're going to put together a broad portfolio, and we're going to put your stuff in front of a lot of different esports audiences. That's a win. Like, there's huge diversification benefits from there. But there are a lot of developers that are making that really hard. That's bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of developers that are more exclusive. So obviously Overwatch League wants to have exclusive sponsorships. And then you look at Call of Duty franchising now as well, which is something I would love to talk about, because I know how much you guys love.
Let's compare. I think there's a really fun compare contrast between the two.
Between the two? All right, so I don't know.
They're literally, to me, they're in polar opposite places. Go ahead, though, Richard. I want to hear, because I think I know where Richard's going to fall on this spectrum.
So what about the Call of Duty franchising?
Let's take CoD. So CoD franchising, to absolutely nobody who'd been paying an iota of attention. Surprise was just announced. The asking price for franchise tag is set around $25 million. Not coincidentally, $5 million higher than the original Overwatch franchising fees were. At the same time, Overwatch has announced that they are going to go to true home and away stadiums as early as next season, with the individual franchises expected to develop venues within their home city. I think the comparison of the two right now is ironic to me, to say the least.
Yeah. Look, so I knew about the Call of Duty franchising coming in for some time. I actually broke the story and no one paid any attention to it, which is Yeah, I know, crazy, right? I want to say it was in July 2018. I think I broke the story before it was officially announced. That's how far back you have to go. But maybe even before that. And the reason I knew this was because there were several people who were considering purchasing Overwatch franchises. And to sweeten the deal, Bobby Kotick and the sales team over at Activision Blizzard was saying, listen, we're going to franchise for Call of Duty too. This is going to be the model. So, just a heads up, getting in our good graces now with this product, with this game, will perhaps enable us to have a relationship for a bigger game. The Call of Duty launches that we've seen are some of the biggest media launches of any kind, including movie red carpet galas in the world. And indeed, I think the biggest ever was the GTA 5 launch. It eclipses anything in terms of money spent and reach and money made back from game sales. It's crazy. So anyway, one of the things that people were asking for was going, well, okay, so let's say we become the LA team for Overwatch. Do we get the LA franchise for Call of Duty? And Blizzard were going, well, no, not necessarily. You'll have to bid for it like everybody else. And then people were like, so what? We don't own a territory for all games. So that was a problem. And that's how I heard about it, because I talked to a lot of people who were bidding on the Overwatch. And they were going, we don't even get the Call of Duty team when they franchise that league as well. So, then what they started doing was they were saying to some people, like the big names that they were using, like, Kraft, Robert Kraft, they were saying, maybe you get yours, but everyone else doesn't. Maybe we give you a sweetheart deal and you pay more, but we give you, the complete territory for both games. So whatever. Is a Call of Duty franchise worth $25 million? No. Definitely not. An Overwatch franchise still isn't worth $20 million. I don't give a fuck what anyone says. They are not worth the money that you are paying. Certainly not the franchise spot. Yeah.
Which is closer? Because I don't think it's even close. I think I think
you're better off buying an Overwatch franchise.
I think if there is a reality in the infinite parallel universes, if there is a single reality where you would spend $20 million for an Overwatch franchise, you ought to be willing to buy into Call of Duty for $25 million in a heartbeat, because you're getting a robust franchise with a large and stable installed base, a presence across multiple consoles. You can much more easily research the community and their wants and needs. To me, if you are even willing to entertain that an Overwatch spot might be worth $20 million, the idea that you pay $25 million for COD is a layup.
But the problem that you encounter here, and this is why I'm more inclined to lean towards Overwatch. Overwatch is creating completely brand new brands from the start, regional based brands, and have specifically said we'd much again, behind the scenes, we'd much rather have big sports VC groups in this running their teams than we would endemic esports people. Yep. Unfortunately, all of the reach in Call of Duty is localized to a few orgs. And what they're doing is they're not letting you be FaZe. They're not letting you be Optic. They're not letting you be E-United. You have to be the Chicago Optics, the New York FaZe, right? They're going to regionalize and they're going to give you territories, which is completely contrary to everything good that the Call of Duty orgs have going on, which is this huge reach. Hex has famously said he would need at least 2 cities to even justify doing it that way, because
I think what's interesting though is that this discussion turns one of the usual debates surrounding these franchise leagues on its head, and that's a lot of people have asked me the question: is there actual value associated to being the Boston Uprising or the Houston Outlaws? What value does that locale have? Is there any actual local presence? I think there's very clear value to being the London Spitfire. I don't think Cloud9 minds that a bit. But in the U.S., you're right, where a lot of these COD franchises already operate and their presence is countrywide. I look at it more like college teams, and I look at what the top college programs in basketball and football like Duke and like Michigan in football, they're national brands. And there are a lot of people outside of the state of Michigan that root for Michigan. There are more people outside of the state of North Carolina than in North Carolina that root for Duke. And I don't think that is going to be – I think if you market it right, that's not an obstacle. I don't think it's an obstacle at all. The problem is – and this is not to say that Richard's concerns are invalid. What I see with a lot of these brands is that the value of brand equity is not being optimized. And this is very screw-upable, to use a technical term. But I think I'm very bullish on COD. I think, to me, if you were to hire me as a consultant and ask me how do you get $25 million worth of value out of a COD franchise tag, I'd have a damn easier time answering that question than getting $20 million value out of Overwatch, especially because what they're essentially doing to Overwatch at a time when the product metrics look really, really suspect. They're coming back to the first-round investors and going, hey, we'd like some more capital, please. And that, if you want to talk cynical, Richard, that's what makes me real cynical, because that's what I'm starting to suspect is the reason that they wanted these big sports VCs in rather than the endemic esports brands, because they anticipated 2 and 3 years in, when the product metrics weren't necessarily strong, having to go back and ask for more cash. And the traditional sports franchises are much more likely to put up with something like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's kind of par for the course, right? But the reality is, I think it's also because if you pitch something to esports orgs and you say, hey, buy into our league, you get a $1 million buy-in, a $2 million buy-in. If you go to a bunch of fucking rubes who the only thing they know is that esports is big right now and our demographic is a bunch of cable cutters, 50-year-old thick-necked truckers who are all dying out and all the kids are playing esports, fuck it, I'll throw 20 mil at you. I'll throw 20 mil if I've got 100 mil in the bank. I'll throw 20 mil if you're promising me all these like incredible returns. The reason that I think Overwatch is perhaps better positioned for 20 mil than Call of Duty is for 25. I attended the last CWL. It was here in Vegas. I enjoyed it, a great event. But then I went away and I looked at the numbers and how many people were watching. And the average viewership was 82,000 concurrents, which is half of what Overwatch generally tends to have. And the peak was 192, I want to say, in the final. So, but again, I could be incorrect about that. So these numbers, again, like we all say, $20 million for a franchise that is getting on average about 150,000 viewers, this is, and declining, even though they've expanded and brought in new franchises, which just by definition should mean there's more fans, so the viewership should be trending upwards. And I'm not talking about the funny little metrics that you use where you go, but hours have gone up, and this has gone up, and that's gone up. Yeah, we get it. Those numbers are way more manipulate. You can manipulate those numbers super easy. You can't manipulate concurrent viewership super easy, despite all your best efforts with embedding and putting it in the client and all the other bullshit methods that Activision Blizzard uses as default by now. But the reality is, there seems to be more people watching the Overwatch League than there are right now watching the CWL circuit. Maybe that changes if you create a franchise league. I don't know. A lot of people in the Call of Duty scene are very against it, including a lot of the average fans. I think regionality for Call of Duty and for orgs like FaZe and Optic and United and other big brands makes no fucking sense whatsoever. On top of that, what's interesting is MLG look to be, despite, Call of Duty's their bread and butter, right, and producing those events. Sundance is gone. There's rumors that Adam Apicella might be going. There's a lot of experts in that game in Call of Duty that help build MLG and help build Call of Duty as we know it as a broadcast going out the door. I don't know, guys. I think Call of Duty could end up being a very insipid broadcast experience compared to what we have right now. And
that's the problem, right? I mean, the problem is if the quality of the product changes, because to me, again, I agree with what Richard said about concurrent viewers is the number that we bandy about because it's the one number that we have a sense of what it actually means. We have a sense that nobody's doctored that. Yes, embedding is a problem, but whatever. The problem is, again, I look at those 80,000 COD viewers, and I know what I'm going to get out of them. I know who watches COD, right? I'm not sure who watches Overwatch. I'm not sure that a lot of those viewers are people that I can actually sell to. And
well, Overwatch is marketed specifically at people who either don't feel they can get involved in esports and gaming for whatever reason they've been told. For example, it's an unwelcoming space, and for people who've never watched esports before. Because if you were an aficionado of good esports, you would take one look at Overwatch and you would laugh at how terrible it is as a viewing experience.
Well, but that's exactly what I mean, though, is that to me, if the value proposition here is that we're going to create this title that's going to pull in and retain, and those last two words are very important, people that view themselves as casuals and that haven't watched other esports. I mean, isn't the onus on you to create a more spectator-friendly experience, an experience that actually highlights the action better and the elements of gameplay better from the point of view of the spectator? And to me, that's the number one failing of Overwatch. They have utterly failed in their development of spectator.
Oh, yeah, and I agree with this. In the idea of which game could I show to somebody who's never watched esports before and them immediately understand and have a better time? Obviously, Overwatch
is like near last on that list, man.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what scares the shit out of me is that the strategy and the actions of the developer in the years since OWL formed have been completely incongruous with what I understand to be the core value proposition. Not to use too many business school buzzwords there, but to me, that's what we teach our students. Be scared when you see this.
So do you think that, when you're talking about the value of the different franchises and something that is being hedged around but not directly said, the value of these franchises is your ability to sell it to people. Yes, to sell sponsors and make money off the franchise.
Largely brand equity. Absolutely.
Yeah. So to Nahaz, you're saying that Call of Duty, it's easier to sell to advertisers. It's easier to sell to a sponsor because they know their audience. But Richard's point is that Overwatch has double the viewership, which is
well, not just that though. Understand that for whatever reason, Overwatch is just considered cartoony enough by the average big sponsor that
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah. Is because we talked about this on the last.
Still bombs and guns and all the shit that we don't like.
Yeah, we discussed this. You were talking about showing Fortnite versus PUBG to someone with a 12-year-old child.
Yeah.
And that same question applies here as far as Overwatch League versus Call of Duty. When you're going to sell this to sponsors and your goal is to capture the younger generation, rather than the people in their 40s and 50s, you want to capture younger people.
But is it so?
What you're showing?
I think that's a mistake, though, that a lot of people are making. I mean, when you're talking about the divide, like we've been having this discussion for a time now. This is not a new discussion, and over time, as we've continued to have the discussion, that dividing line between the population that you're reaching on subscription cable and the population that you're reaching on a live stream, that dividing line continues to grow in terms of average age. I'm not so sure that the audience that you're reaching on the esports broadcast is really that young anymore in terms of their consumption pattern. But that's the thing is
perception as far as who you're selling it to, right? If you go to Chick-fil-A, they might sponsor Overwatch. There's no way they're sponsoring PUBG. Or CSGO.
Fortnite has kind of, in a way, it's been great. In another way, it's thrown a big wrench in the gears because Fortnite has reached all the 12-year-olds. Fortnite really has reached all the 12-year-old kids that, like my friend's 12-year-old, are stealing mom and dad's wallet to buy skins, and then not realizing that they can see the credit card bill.
And just 2 points on the Chick-fil-A example. If Soldier 76 gets married to a dude, Chick-fil-A are definitely out. And I honestly don't.
Let's be real.
I actually don't think Activision Blizzard would even entertain Chick-fil-A as a sponsor because of their obvious ideological differences in companies. So just putting that out there. Sourpatch Kids, on the other hand, sponsoring Overwatch, definitely wouldn't sponsor Call of Duty.
Fair enough.
So that's the question. And then you're also talking about the fact that they're not looking to endemic esports. They're looking at Nissan and Saturn and whatever their car companies are buying. They're
exactly where I was going to go next.
No, right? And so when you're selling someone who doesn't know and you're showing them a gameplay reel, they don't know what the hell's going on in Overwatch. They don't know what the hell's going on in Call of Duty. It's people getting shot. But in one, it's a lot prettier than in the other. And so when you think about these brands and who they're looking to market to, if you're going to a beer company, they're probably going to pick Call of Duty. But, car companies, which, again, older audience, but it depends on the sponsor. I just, like, to Richard's point, I personally see Overwatch as more sellable to non-endemic.
I don't think that argument has the teeth that a lot of people think it has. I mean, you watch the NCAA basketball tournament on a Saturday, and I'm trying to watch this with my 5-year-old. And, there are commercials for episodes of CSI where they're showing dead bodies on the screen, like bloodied. And she's going, Daddy, what is that? Why is that person hurt? Is that person dead? I mean, I don't think that there are, at least if you go by TV advertising, and the data support this, we are fairly desensitized to violence, and there is a political element that comes in when you start talking about violence in games. It's more realistic in a sense. I don't know. I don't think that argument is quite as problematic as a lot of other people I've heard espouse.
But there's also, which granted, Counter-Strike has the additional complication of literally the word terrorist, which I think
Counter-Strike is too. Counter-Strike, I think, is if there's a sort of edge case where we know that there's a problem, Counter-Strike at least has to think about it. Now, again, if I'm Counter-Strike, I'm looking at it and going, I'm not going to fix what's not broken. But
yeah, I mean, they're not looking to franchise, right,
no,
Richard?
Well, not Valve.
No, I mean, actually, there are rumors circulating about some weird sort of official league that Valve would kind of be running. I mean, again, I've heard it from several owners. I don't know how real it is. But there's some other stuff happening on the periphery that makes me think there could be a grain of truth in it. TSM have always famously rejected CS as well, ever since they mismanaged the great Danish team that went on to become Astralis. They haven't been back in the game. Now they're looking to pick up any old shitters. They're looking to just throw 5 players together to have a team. Generally, when orgs do shit like that, it reeks of gold rush. Get in ahead of something. So
it's tough, right? At least the problem with Valve is that the Dota 2 team and the CSGO team are very disparate entities. I cannot see, based on what we know of the Dota 2 team, I cannot see them being willing to give up the kind of control that they would need to give up to run a franchise league. I mean, when the bottom line is when you're asking 20 to 25 million for these franchise tags, you are selling to a bunch of equity holders who you then need to keep happy. And I don't see the Dota 2 team signing up to be beholden to anybody and keep anybody happy. CSGO is another animal, largely because I think that there are increasingly signs that there's just a hell of a lot more value left in that franchise than we might have thought a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, even what Richard's saying, it's not necessarily a franchise league that we could see for CSGO, right? If you look at, what is it, ESA, EPL, ECF, there's a couple different CSGO leagues that are all fighting with each other right now, and that's what a lot of the discussion is about. And that same fight is what happened in Dota that partially led to Valve stepping in and saying, these are the majors, these are the dates. These count for points. Nobody else start hijacking each other's broadcast dates, right?
Wow.
There was, I obviously there's issues with qualifiers overlapping that also led Valve to step in and set established qualifier dates and everything. So I think
which by the way are days after the last major concludes and
during the last major,
during the last major and blah. I mean, but
the issues I see in CS:GO, I could see incentivizing Valve not to run it themselves, but to go to ESL and say, we'll give you half the prize pool, or basically saying, give us a bid, you run this league, it counts for points, we'll try to have the prize.
They can never let one company do it because everyone gets so bent out of shape about that. So Valve would have to literally run this league. They would absolutely have to, or at least have some sort of team that disseminates information about how the league has to be run. I think in an ideal world, what everyone would like is if Valve did create a league of that nature, you would take a Faceit, you would take an ESL, you would take whoever the other big players are, Gfinity and the SEA and blah, 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 for the Mountain Dew League, and you would put them all in, and then they would all have some sort of say at a round table. Personally, I'm so fucking tired of it. I exposed the creation of 2 exclusivity leagues and basically prevented them coming into fruition in the past. And that was that was to stop one company aggressively coming in and basically taking over the space. And I would get pats on the back from all the other companies that weren't trying to do that, saying, you've done a great thing for Counter-Strike, and you've helped keep being independent.
With the unseen proviso that we would do it too if we could get away with it.
And then they did try to do it. Yeah. Same people who were fucking congratulating me and buying me cocktails. So what a waste of time. At the end of the day, I've gone from trying to protect esports from its more base natures to now I almost feel like, fuck it. Maybe survival of the fittest is the only way to go. Let these fucking jackals tear each other to shreds and just let the alphas run away with it all, because otherwise we're stuck in this weird little perpetual cycle of just continual attritional war where the only people who suffer are really the fans of esports because they get pushed and pulled between so many separate products. And in the end, the game fucking fizzles out, man, because nobody wins in a requisite time frame to build something truly exceptional. I'm
You're
starting
lucky
to change.
Scoots isn't in here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know what's funny? I had this when I interviewed Scoots recently. We had a long talk about it, and he said, listen, I've got the same shit you've got. I'm in 2 hemispheres because I don't want corporations to corporatize and completely own and commodify and completely own an esport. Basically, they're the ones that dictate what best practice is. I don't want that. But equally, I understand that when you have this war of like multiple teams doing, multiple brands doing it, multiple orgs doing it, very rarely does this work out for the best for like players, and pro players and stuff like this. So, and plus as well, Scooch used to be a corporate dude. I mean, EG were fucking ruthless, notoriously so. Go talk to Jason Lake back in the glory days of fucking Counter-Strike in NA when there was a handful of sponsors to go around and EG got them all. Got them all, and they were willing to do anything to get them all. So, yeah, I mean, he understands it as well. And like, I'm similarly conflicted,
But I think I think being conflicted in that situation is healthy. I mean, I think that you are talking by its very nature a lot of times in business of choosing the lesser of a lot of evils, and sometimes even mashing them all together in hopes of creating one lesser still. That just it's the nature of the game that you play. I think that the big difference that I see in esports and traditional sports, and something that hasn't even really been approached, is all of the big traditional sports leagues, in the US at least, have an entity in the commissioner's office, or whatever you want to call it, that is tasked specifically with protecting the welfare of the game, the good of the game, and the long-term viability of the game. And yeah, you can use the argument, and that's certainly accurate, that Roger Goodell and the others wearing that hat their economic incentives are indeed more in line with the owners than they are with the players. And so you do need powerful players associations, even with a commissioner's office. I will grant that to Scoots in a heartbeat. But at the same time, that's what I see lacking is, when Richard talks about the corporate overlords, the economist part of me is tempted to roll my eyes sometimes, but the part of me that has context with these esports communities, it really resonates, because right now you look at a lot of these esports titles and you ask yourself, is there an entity that is looking out for the long-term good of the game? Mm-hmm. And I worry that the developers, who are really the only ones that have the power to be or to create such an entity, are still way too short run profit maximizing. Hey, let's get all the revenue that we can out of this game while it's still alive, rather than creating a franchise. I mean, it feels like the franchises that we have in esports were created almost by accident, or more by the fans than the developer.
Well, and you also, I mean, you look at how Valve operates, right? And I would say their take almost is a little bit not my problem, right? So as far as the health of the game or the growth of the game, it seems like Valve's approach is it's community driven, the community likes it, cool, run with it. And when they really took over for a year, we saw what happened. They went, oh God, this is awful.
Right.
Never mind, third parties, you deal with all this. We don't feel like it.
When you talk to people at Valve about what they do and what the company does, the answer is still, by and large, we make games. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're not, Activision Blizzard, EA, these are companies that are interested in being something more than game developers and are trying to set themselves up business-wise so that they have all these different revenue channels. Valve is still a company that sees itself primarily as a game developer. They don't want to be a company. They have, there have been at least a half dozen people that I know of that have interviewed with Valve for Dota to be a community manager. And it's just, again, it's never worked out because it's never clear that Valve has been interested in hiring somebody that's not going to make games.
Well, and you can see that in how they've structured things, right? So they say to third-party tournaments, yep, send us bids and we'll give you half the prize pool and you run it. And they have gotten out of Seattle, and a lot of people say, oh, that's because, Key Arena is being rebuilt. And everything that I have heard is Valve is sick of TI taking a month of every single employee's time.
Yeah.
The entire company, everything becomes about TI for that month. And they're sick of it. And so
it's one of those things I've heard that too. And it's always, I give a little bit of a despairing chuckle because it's one month of your time where you take home, upwards of $100 million in revenue. Boo, freaking who?
But I see that, and I look at PUBG, right, which was a $30 game and sold how many copies? I mean, what was Valve's take home from PUBG? Millions, hundreds of millions is their take home from PUBG. What did Valve have to do? Absolutely nothing.
No, that's okay. Wait a minute.
Well, okay. I mean,
Economist here. That's a part of the rent that they're getting from the development of the largest digital distribution.
Well, yes, but when you
blah blah blah, I get it.
When you look at TI revenue, right, where a quarter of it goes to the prize pool, and people say, "Oh, Valve's pocketing $75 million." Well, you think of how much it takes to run TI, and I don't think it'd be unreasonable to say TI takes $10 million to put on. Potentially way more. I don't know what venue costs are. And so if you say Valve are taking home $60 million from TI, and I look at that and I go, yeah, but how much are they taking home from this game? How much do they take home from GTA? How much do they take home from PUBG? And how much work did they have to do a month's worth of work every year for TI alone and then work all year long to maintain Dota? What do you think their take home is on that as compared to the very small amount of effort it is for all of the games that are on their store? And I think the revenue are huge.
I still think I get where you're coming from, and I think the principle of the argument is sound. I still think arguing that what Valve gets in a year from Dota is somehow less than the opportunity cost of that total time invested is it's a difficult position to take.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Dota
very well.
Dota's making plenty of money for them. It's just the comparison.
No, they want to get out of. Oh, let's be clear. They want to get out of Seattle because they want to get into China.
Yeah, and they
and they should again. Anybody that takes to look at their business model and what they're doing right now, it's a gold mine. It is literally the get out of jail free card. If you are Valve, you could make 5 more artifacts. Mm-hmm. And as long as you succeed in China, it doesn't matter.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, the one knock-on effect that we really need to worry about, I think, and look, there was already this stupid, kind of hive mind going about, oh, Valve don't care about making games anymore, and they just want to run Steam and make money and as much money as possible. Again, imagine that, a corporation being profit-focused. Like, what do you expect? And this was all being driven by all those fucking losers that just couldn't handle the fact that, Half-Life doesn't get its, you don't get the third installment.
Can't count to 3.
Yo, like, I mean, as a kid who grew up with some pretty fucking, great game series myself, great TV shows, there have been a lot of cliffhangers down the fucking years, Let's talk about Twin Peaks season 2, motherfuckers, and how long we had to wait.
You get inured to it after a while.
Yeah, exactly, right? You just get used to it. Not all art has to have a fucking follow-up, and sometimes stories don't get finished. They run out of money, whatever. I think
what if we could go back in time and the second and third Matrix movies never got made?
Yeah, right? Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be great? But, look, there was even one on the Atari. What the fuck was it called? Was it Sword Quest? Do you remember that far back?
Oh my God!
Not old enough for this discussion.
Right. Well, there was a game called fucking Sword Quest, and I'm actually researching a video about this too. I never make my videos; I just research them. But, there was something in the '80s where it was like they made a game, and the game had I remember competition. And if you won the competition, you got like a jewel encrusted crown for one, and a jewel encrusted Ottoman or whatever the fuck they're called for another one. Yeah, and it was like Earthworld, Fireworld, Waterworld, and they released the game a year and had a competition. Well, Atari went bust because we had the great computer game crash in the 80s. Yes, these bubbles do burst, folks. It's crazy, I know. And they never released the final installment, which was meant to be Airworld. It never got completed. It happens sometimes. Get the fuck over it. Just get the fuck over it. So what if Half-Life doesn't come out? So fucking what? It's got nothing to do with Valve are evil and they hate us and they just want to make money or whatever. They went out, they made Artifact, and the worst thing that could have happened because that game fucking flopped. Now, with any luck, the rumors about them buying Dota chess as a mod and how they're going to jazz it up and pump loads of money into that are true, because that might give them that yen to do it again. But the way that Artifact was pretty much attacked from the get-go, from its announcement, and what they made was actually a pretty well polished game.
Oh, it strategy wise was immaculate.
Yeah, it just got some fundamental flaws. If those streamers that had all this early access weren't a bunch of yes men pussies, probably the game would have got fucking fixed, wouldn't it? Instead, all they did for 3 months, or 6 months, or whatever it was when they had the early access, they tweeted saying, "Artifact's gonna blow your mind. Artifact's gonna blow your mind."
No. It's even worse than that. Like, what they did is they had these tournaments internally where they bring in some of the best, card players, Hearthstone, whatever, in the world, the stories from this will blow your mind, man. Like, this game, the strategic potential of this game was amazing, but again, there was every time I asked somebody in the beta, hey, what is the transactional model going to be? How are cards going to be marketed and shared? How are you as a player going to interact with the game over time and build your deck? It was kind of like, well, I don't know. But again, going back to this loot box thing, that is now, in this age of gaming, the way that you interact with loot boxes and progress in the game is first order important to gameplay. It is absolutely as important as what happens in an individual match. And if you don't get that part right, everything you do right in the other respect doesn't matter.
Well, it seems like Valve styled. So Richard was talking about how, when you used to buy Magic cards, you knew what was rare. Yeah. You knew, so for me, it was Pokemon, because again, I was younger.
My little brother had Pokemon cards.
Yeah, so you'd buy a pack of 13 cards, and you knew that one of them would have the little star, that one of them would be the rare, special, powerful card. And you always knew that you would get one. And that was how it used to work. And now the way that, and that doesn't really exist anymore. Everything has changed as with the loot boxes. And what it seems like Artifact did, and what I heard from a lot of people, is they wanted it to be exactly like Magic. They wanted it to be the same as Magic. But unfortunately, that's an outdated model that people don't use anymore.
I don't know that it was, I just don't know that was, again, I don't know that the Magic model, even beyond it being outdated, was viable through primarily a digital distribution.
Well, exactly. That's the other problem. One, it's an old model, and two, it's a different medium. You're not physically holding a card.
They created so many rods for their back with the way they decided to do things. Like, first of all, digital card games in this day and age are fucking free to play. That put everyone noses out of joint immediately. But then it's like, okay, well, for night, am I getting value for the $20 I'm paying? Then it turned out actually you really weren't, because you had to pay for those like runs where you got to keep the cards.
Yep.
So it's like, the tickets. So it's like, and sure, you got some free tickets with it, but we all know it costs them nothing to do that. So it's not like it's real physical value in any sense. Then the other problem you've got is, how the fuck do you balance a game where the cards have intrinsic value? Day one, Axe was selling for $30, right? Because he was so strong compared to everything else. Now he's nerfed. He ain't worth $30 no more. That's if anyone was still playing the game. I mean, none of the cards are worth shit anymore because the player base has disappeared. But
initially they said they weren't going to change the cards, and then he was so broken, they were like, we're going to change the
card game. There is no way. Put it this way. You didn't even do that with Magic before digital card games. There were fucking combinations that were banned off the tournament circuit.
Exactly.
They phased them out when they had further editions. There were cards that were just like, shit, man, this is too OP. We can't change it in real time. Next edition, though, we'll print out rules saying you won't see these cards at tournaments. You can't put these cards in decks. Obviously, you can do what you want at home. We don't have dominion over that. But for the next edition, those cards won't be there, or they'll interact slightly differently. That was how they handled it. What Valve were committing to was insanity, because it could never be reality. It means you had to create a perfectly balanced game on day one. But
the thing is, is that not so Valve though? Like, if the quintessential Blizzard response to a problem like this is to bury your head in the sand, the quintessential Valve response is to say, well, look, this isn't going to happen to us because we're just really that freaking good.
It was the Dota balancing ethos of, if everything's broken, nothing is. If everything's OP, nothing is. So it'll be okay. And what we can do is, when we release an expansion pack for our hugely successful digital collectible card game, we'll just bring in some shit that'll fix the shit, because it'll counter the shit. They thought about balancing a card game like it was a MOBA. Can't be done, I'm afraid, guys. Completely different design philosophies. And I'm surprised it happened on Richard Garfield's watch, frankly, because he's a savvy guy who's been around the block and been involved in the development of a lot of games, not just Magic the Gathering, developed a lot of successful games. I want to say, was he recently involved in that Keyforge one that came out as well? Maybe. But anyway, whatever. The point is, what they were committing to was absurd. This is before you get into business models. This is, and there were just a lot of, and also day one releases for games that are features light. Artifact's one of the worst I've ever seen. Like, in terms of, I could literally either play a competitive mode of the game or a non-competitive mode of the game, or I could use my tickets to try and win some cards. But I noticed the marketplace was completely perfect and actually had some features I wish they had in Dota when it came to listing stuff on the shop. Sure. Definitely port that across. So you could see immediately where the priority was. It came out and it felt like a beta, and that's your problem. Right there.
I think there's interaction between the two, right? That the more problems there are with one aspect of the gameplay in a title, the less forgiving the player base is of problems in other aspects. And I think that's why, and I really think your point about there are just a lot of people who had it in for this title from the beginning is also very well taken. That's a thing. And
of course. But again, a lot of the for me, a lot of the responsibility for the state Artifact ended up in has to go to a lot of these streamers that had early access, had Valve's ear, and were too pussy to fucking say anything about it because they don't want to lose early access to
I think it's both though, because I know for a fact, again, I know a lot of these guys, and the questions that they were being asked. They were being asked a lot of questions about the nitty-gritty, the deep mechanics of how this card works with this card and how blah, blah, blah works with blah, 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 and virtually nothing about the overall playing experience. Right?
I also know that some of the people who played did bring up strong concerns about certain cards and combinations, and the game got published without any of that being addressed.
Well, here's the thing, right? Some of what happened, again, being quintessentially Valve, if you look at the way, the good and bad of the way Dota is balanced, right, is that, a hero shows up and a team makes a run to the finals of TI or the finals of some tournament with one hero. And then another team who happens to be the best team in the world figures out a way to beat it in the finals. And a lot of the times it's like, oh, well, there's not a balance problem there. It's beatable, right? That was a part of the problem that I was hearing with Artifact is some of these balance problems, they have these internal tournaments, so they'd watch these people play, and the good players would find a way to beat it. And it'd be like, oh, well, that's fine. That's balanced. Not necessarily correcting for the fact that, yeah, it's balanced if you're in the top 1% of the skill distribution of players. For the other 99%, including 100% of the schlups that are loading the game for the first time on launch day, it just feels really shit.
Or if you're like me and luckily get a bunch of axes in your first game, you're like, haha, this game's great. So there's options both ways. So I do know we're approaching the end of our time here, and I don't want to make anybody late to their commitments. So as always, we're going to end a cooldown on exactly what stories we are paying attention to, and while you guys take a moment to think of what you want to let people to keep their eyes on. For me personally, my vested interest is in keeping an eye on China and sort of the attentions that the Western Dota community has towards the Eastern Dota community when we look at tournaments that happen in China, when we look at some of the recent tournament payment issues, some of the WSG, WCA scandals and everything, visa problems and everything. No, I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with China, but I think that the attitudes on Reddit and social media and what people are saying, something I'm going to be paying very close attention to, because as Nahaz said, Valve cares a lot more about China right now most likely than they do about their other markets. So I just want to see how that relationship develops.
For me, there's a few actually kind of on my radar. Nothing that immediately leaps out as like being quintessentially important. There's some stuff coming in about Tencent, which there's some concern around Tencent's role kind of in China and relationships to the government and monopolistic practices, which, if that progresses, that could definitely have an impact on a lot of things that happen within esports. So I'm keeping an eye on that.
And not limited to Tencent as well.
Yeah, of course, right?
Yeah, the Chinese tech sector has the potential to have some huge messes, and it potentially could affect gaming. Richard's absolutely right. Sorry.
No. So, I mean, I think that's an important one. That's, again, going on in the distance. Not that we can ever do anything about it because it's fucking China. So, I mean, we've just got to put up with it and pretend it's all fine. So, because that's where the money is.
I'm following. I think I'm in Richard's boat that there are a lot of things that are sort of blips on my radar. I don't know that there's any big missiles being launched. I'm continuing to follow the BR genre and its development journey into esports. I still think Apex has a lot of potential. I'm not sure just how competitive you want to go with that title. I think I continue to be a little bit disappointed with Fortnite in terms of Epic continues to posture as if they want to take the competitive side a little bit more seriously, and then those promises feel like they get perpetually broken. I guess business-wise, that may end up being in their best interest anyway. But whether PUBG I'm somewhat concerned. There are a lot of people that I know and really like that are working on PUBG and continue to do it, and I still think that is the game in that genre that's had the most successes in esport. I still, in terms of its trajectory, am a little bit uneasy. And Dota-wise, I continue to keep my eyes on. I still think that sometime in the next couple of months, there is going to be this huge nuclear roster detonation where at least one of the teams that is mathematically qualified to TI is going to drop at least 2 and probably 3 of its players, and the community is going to wake up to the fact that this team now is qualified to TI with 2 out of its 5 players that actually earned his points, and those 3 players are now fucked.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, that's, a lovely positive 10.
Sorry.
No, it's always a good thing.
Don't let the economist talk last if you want positivity.
No, I'm okay with it. The DPC is always something that needs to be closely examined and generally needs large changes after every season. All right, guys. So that is it for this episode of the Cooldown. Thank you for joining us. As always, like, subscribe, comment, share, let people know where to find this, and let these guys know what you think and any topics you'd like to hear about in the future. This was Richard Lewis and Nahaz on the Rivalry Cooldown. We'll see you guys next time.